The story that has kind of overtaken the NFL today, 31-1. The owners voted in favor of the Raiders heading to Vegas. They will be known as the Las Vegas Raiders starting in 2020. We don't know where they're going to play in 2019. They'll spend the next 2 years, John McMullen, playing at the Coliseum in Oakland as a lame duck over there, and then they'll be moving to Vegas. Were you surprised that it was a 31-1 vote today, that all these owners were on board?
A little bit. The number I heard was 28-4 coming into it, so it was going to pass easily. But the fact that it was so emphatic in 31-1, it speaks to a couple things. It speaks to the power Jerry Jones has garnered in this league. I tweeted, he's the most powerful owner in the NFL, and it's not close right now. And it also talks to the sort of grandstanding of Stephen Ross as the only guy who kind of begged off the Miami Dolphins owner. But this was a done deal, and everyone knew it coming in, and it's sad. It's always sad when a market loses its team, and when you consider it's the second time for the people of Oakland losing the Raiders, I suppose it makes it even worse for them.
Hey, John, it was originally thought that because Vegas is the home of gambling, that would deter the league from going there. What happened?
Well, money talks, Pete. I think it's interesting because the city of Las Vegas, think about this. Think about the absurdity of this. The city of Las Vegas was awarded an NFL team before NFL officials are allowed to enter the stadium, the city in season. They are prohibited from visiting Las Vegas during the NFL season. They have been for years and years and years, and as of today, they still are. But the city itself has been awarded an NFL team, and all those rules, and they have a lot of them when it comes to ownership and it comes to cities and it comes to markets, they can all be erased at the snap of a finger if there's enough money. Stan Kroenke's a perfect example of that. There was once a rule, and actually it still exists, where you cannot own a franchise in another sport in a different market. But obviously Stan Kroenke owns a number of things in the Colorado area, in the Denver area, and you know what? He's so rich, they overlooked it. They forced him to do some bookkeeping and sort of give it to his kids, but everybody knows he's still in control. And, hey, money talks, and they'll just ignore certain things, and they're going to ignore the gambling thing that they talked about for years.
They also ignored that they just went from the sixth biggest television market to number 40, which seemingly the NFL wanted to get back into L.A. for the number 2 television market, but don't care about leaving the number 6 market for number 40.
Yeah, and that's one of those convenient things they'll talk about when they want to talk about it, and they'll ignore it in other aspects because, one thing that was proven in the 2 decades that the NFL was away from Los Angeles is that not being in that market didn't really affect its TV ratings at all. It's more of a national sport. It doesn't really matter, and they understand that. That's why there's no concern that they're leaving Oakland for a smaller market in Las Vegas. It's not going to hurt them at all from a TV perspective, and it helps them from a financial perspective. That's the reason they allowed St. Louis to move back to Los Angeles. It wasn't about the TV market. It was about the money, and it's the same thing here.
Talk with John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. You can check out his national NFL coverage over at FanRag Sports NFL. So we know Mark Davis is not, as you mentioned, Kroenke. I mean, he doesn't have money coming out the yin-yang here. He doesn't have a lot of assets outside of the team. In California, they were kind of wary about the taxpayer money for stadiums. So in the end, how did Mark Davis and Vegas pull this off?
Well, Vegas pulled it off because they have obviously a situation that's very unique, and because of the tourism there, they can sort of foot the bill and do it from people outside of the area. Obviously, if you're going to raise taxes in Oakland, you're going to impact the people that live in the city. Because there's so much tourism in Las Vegas, what they're able to do is tax hotel rooms, and really the hit is coming from people outside the area, so it's easier politically to get it done. So they took advantage of that unique situation, and it's something maybe Orlando could do, but very few other cities in this country can accomplish what Las Vegas did, and that gave them a big leg up, because they can publicly subsidize this almost $2 billion facility and not take nearly the massive political hit other cities have to take.
Also, the relocation fee is what? I'm reading about $400 million as opposed to $650 million for the Chargers and the Rams. Or is it similar?
It's going to be about $50 million per owner this time, so it's less. You're right, and that's another one of those sliding scales where they can kind of manipulate the figures the way they want to. But still, it's a big paycheck for every other owner, so that's part of the reason why they kind of, even though it's bad for the sport as a whole, and I think people have to take a long-term view. There's no reason a league with this kind of popularity should have the movement and the relocation that this league is having currently, and really in the recent past, over the past 20, 30 years. It shouldn't happen, but it continues to happen. And one of the underlying reasons is the fact that the other owners get a big paycheck at the end. So you can kind of say, hey, you're going to get an extra $50 million.
So everybody's cheering for somebody else to move.
I wouldn't say that far, except Jerry Jones. He's cheering because he's got a piece of everybody. Jerry Jones has a stake in the Rams, the 49ers, the Chargers, and the Raiders, essentially, because he has an offshoot company called Legacy, which he owns about a third of. And that's a sports marketing company that controls the suites and some other marketing opportunities with these new deals and new stadiums and movement. And that's one of the reasons he's become as powerful behind the scenes, and he could sway that entire room and say, look, this is good for the league, and it's also good for him, obviously. So I think the underreported story of all of this is just how powerful Jerry Jones has become in this league.
Very interesting. And how about Stephen Ross, the one guy who voted against the Raiders? What was his position?
His position is sort of like if you have a politician in Washington who knows something is going to pass and it's not going to be close, and he wants to sort of come off as this grandiose person who's standing up for his particular ideology, he can vote no, and he knows it's not going to affect the policy. That's really what Stephen Ross did here. I don't take anything he did seriously because it was very, very clear this was going to pass and the Raiders were going to be allowed to relocate. So that's just somebody trying to shine a light on himself and say, look at me, look at me.
John McMullen with us talking about the Raiders' move to Las Vegas. So John, they'll play the next 2 years in Oakland, and then in 2019, they have no home. How does that work out? Their stadium in Vegas won't be ready till 2020.
Yeah, this is one of the concerns with this is they're going to be a lame duck for an awful long time, at the minimum 2 years, which they agreed to, and everyone knew. But that's tough to play in a market, even though the Raiders have always had tremendous support. You have to wonder how that's going to play out over the next 2 years. Now, it helps that they're a very good football team, but you can imagine they were bad for a long time. You could imagine how empty that stadium would have been if they still had a bad product. And if things go south again, it could get ugly quickly. And you're right about 2019. There's, could they possibly stay in Oakland for a third year? It's a possibility. Or they can move to Sam Boyd Stadium in Las Vegas and sort of do what the Chargers are doing in the smaller stadium for 1 year. I think that would be the most likely scenario because you can't be a lame duck for 3 years. That's really, really difficult.
When they do eventually end up playing there, will that be the best home field advantage because other teams come into Sin City and, especially the young players coming right out of college and trying to go to the distraction that is Las Vegas?
Well, I kind of think it might be the worst home field advantage because there are so few people that actually live in Las Vegas. It's all transplants. It's all tourism. And in a lot of ways, if your team is going to play the Raiders in Las Vegas, you're going to maybe want to go out if you have the financial wherewithal and you want to make a trip to watch your team on the road. That's the place you're going to go. So I think in a lot of games, especially when they're playing teams that travel well, like the Steelers or the Packers or the Eagles, that stadium could be half Raiders fans, half opponents fans. I think this is going to be a very, very poor home field advantage for the Raiders, and certainly nothing like what they had in Oakland with the black hole.
Yeah. This also, you mentioned that league officials can't go into Vegas. NFL referees are also not allowed to go into Vegas.
That's what I mean.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so you meant officials.
officials.
Okay. I thought you were talking about. I thought that was kind of odd that like NFL executives couldn't go in there. But so you got that going on there. Brandon Marshall has come out and said that he thinks it's going to be a trap for younger players. So how has the NFL evolved its stance? All of a sudden, I know monetarily, but it's not like the Bay Area is a poor area. I mean, they left a pretty affluent spot to come to a spot that could be a trap for the league.
Yeah, I can't really take seriously, that it could be a trap for younger players, Sin City, and we always talk about that. I mean, in theory, Dave and Buster's could be a trap for young players if they're idiots and they want to go out drinking. I mean, I think you're going to have a certain percentage that just don't have any common sense and are going to get in trouble. But as we see in the paper constantly, you see that happening all over the country. I suppose it could be a little bit worse because you have so much to do in Las Vegas. But, I don't think you can look at that aspect and say this is a reason to stay out. The gambling aspect, I mean, things have changed so much.
Right. How big of a concern is that?
I don't think it is because you can gamble anywhere anyway, pretty much. I mean, sports gambling is illegal still in most of the country, but we all know people do it. And there's casinos all over now. You don't have to go to Las Vegas or Atlantic City from that aspect. So, that's sort of tempered a little bit, and the fact that there's this kind of old school thinking is left the NFL, or is at least in the midst of leaving, and it's the timing is weird, as I said, because they still have these archaic rules of keeping the referees and the officials out of the city, and they're obviously going to have to change that. Although Mike Gill might argue they shouldn't change it and get new officials, but you have to evolve, and I think some of the gambling concerns have always been overblown, except for the fact that you're always going to have people, whether it's Tim Donaghy in the NBA or people who have gotten in trouble in gambling in the past, all the way back to Alex Karras in the NFL. You're always going to have a few, but I don't think you can stop that, and that's not a reason to simply say this is not a viable opportunity for us. And I think from the league standpoint, they looked at the deal Oakland put on the table, and it was ludicrous. And you can't tell a businessman that he has to take a bad business deal at the end of the day. It's just not the way this country works.
No, but so in reality, and when you break it down, I mean, Vegas is not as big as Oakland. I mean, it's, as we mentioned, a smaller TV market. There's not a legitimate built-in fan base there. You got a lot of tourists, a lot of transplants there. If you take the money and the business, that part out of it, is this a good move for the Raiders?
No, I don't think it is, to be blunt. I don't. And I think, as I said, I think it's going to be the worst home field advantage in the NFL.
Right.
I don't think there's any question about that. And I think they have one of the better home field advantages, at least when they're good, and they were last season for the first time in a very long time. But when they are good, that's a really, really difficult place to play. But, again, from a long-term perspective, as a businessman, if you're Mark Davis and you have that deal on the table from Las Vegas, conversely to the one Oakland was offering, it's a no-brainer. And some of that other stuff hurts from a football perspective, and you're going to have to try to overcome it. But obviously it wasn't enough for him to take sort of it would be a massive hometown discount, so to speak, to have stayed in Oakland and tried to get something done in that political environment. It's just tremendously difficult.
John McMullen with us, covers the NFL for FanRagSports.com. He's also our Eagles 97.3 ESPN insider. John, things pretty quiet on the Eagles front, although I see some news about Lane Johnson that he's filed an amended lawsuit against the NFL and the NFL Players Association, something about the arbiter being biased. What's the latest with Lane Johnson?
Well, Lane, to his credit, obviously was very upset on what happened in his second PED suspension, and he vowed to fight it way back to when it originally happened. And a lot of us, to be honest, kind of, just looked at it as lip service because we hear that kind of stuff all the time. And then as you really get to the point where the rubber hits the road, people tend to forget about these things because the bottom line is they were guilty and there's not much you can do about it. But in Lane's case, he is moving forward, and the fight is about, obviously, the suspension. And he's not the first player to argue that the NFL system is skewed towards the NFL and the league, and it is, and there's no question about it. But the part where he loses is that this is a collectively bargained system, and the NFLPA is a part of it, and they've agreed to this system, so it doesn't matter if it's fair or not. And that is held up in court time and time again. Tom Brady got all the way to the cusp of the Supreme Court before giving up. And I think ultimately he would have lost for the same reasons because the NFL can do it, because they have been given the right to do it by the players. And that's why he's sort of the first person really to not only argue against the NFL, but also the Players Association, and that they didn't support him in the manner they should have. But in the end of the day, it's a losing argument because
he lost those games.
The system is in place. Yes, the system's in place. The games are already done. It's a collectively bargained agreement, and there's no court in the country. There are a few, and there have been a few over the years who will try to send a political statement and sort of give a stay. And then it ultimately gets overturned because there's not, at the end of the day, the Supreme Court in this country is not going to overturn a collectively bargained agreement. And the reason why has nothing to do with football, because if they do that, that opens up a Pandora's box where every single CBA and every single industry in this country can be looked upon and people can take you to court and overturn it, and they just don't want that.
Yeah, and as we said, you can't get the gains back, and so no matter what goes here is kind of out of football related situation. This is for him, I guess, to recoup money, right?
Yeah, and certainly remember, by failing again, he had that massive guarantee, which was taken off the table. The language was in the contract. So he no longer has that fully guaranteed money. Now, Lane is such a good player that he's likely going to earn that money anyway.
Right.
But obviously, from his standpoint, it's a lot better to have, the financial security of having that guaranteed versus having to earn it each and every year. Because as we know in the NFL, it could be an injury. It could be a swift decline in athleticism. There can be a number of things that happen, and all of a sudden he's not getting that money that was originally guaranteed for him. So, yeah, obviously that part of it's a big deal for him.
John McMullen, more at JF McMullen on Twitter. You can check out all of his national NFL coverage at FanRag Sports NFL. And, of course, any Eagles news that happens and goes down at 97.3 ESPN.com, where, John, you put a plethora of stuff this weekend, including stuff with Jeffrey Lurie getting a little political. Also, the fact that the Eagles are in the market for a couple of long snappers after losing 2 in one day. And then, of course, Connor Barwin speaking about his time in Philadelphia. So catch up on all those stories at 97.3 ESPN.com. And I can't believe I remembered all 3 of those off the top of my head with the way that I've been feeling recently. Woo.
Well, the long snapping thing is the Eagles are trying at the league meetings. They were going to try to make things more safety conscious for long snappers because they lost those 2 in the one game last year. You remember when they lost John Dorenbos and they lost Brent Selleck, and all of a sudden they were having tryouts on the sideline for long snappers. So they were trying to push 2 different rule changes. One they've already sort of bailed on, but the other is the no leaping rule, and that's partly because of the injuries they suffered at that position.
All right, Raiders are moving. They're heading to Vegas, and that will start in 2020. They will be in Oakland the next couple of years. Are they going to continue to call themselves the Oakland Raiders the next couple of seasons? Or are they going to use a different
They
moniker?
are the Oakland Raiders until they leave the city limits. Until the Mayflower vans leave Oakland, they are the Oakland Raiders.
All right, John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. More on the NFL. Mañana. We're getting into the draft time. We'll start to look at some draft stuff this week. Take care, pal.
Hey, thank you, guys.